Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We have Seattle, we have New York, we span the nation. You know, last night I screened a movie that's going to come out in January called The Final Year. It's about Barack Obama's last year of foreign policy, and it really focuses on Samantha Power, Ben Rhodes, Susan Rice, John Kerry, and kind of the Herculean efforts they were trying to sort of check off boxes before they left. And Donald Trump sort of wins at the end, and then you can kind of see them collapse in their hopes and all this. But there was a segment in it where Samantha Power puts on one of the big goggles and goes and is transported to a refugee camp of Syrians. And it was a temporary installation at the United Nations, apparently, and she's so moved by it in the film. And then she speaks, I guess, by Skype or something to one of the people that was featured in the film, long distance. And then she's walking out and runs into the Saudi ambassador of the United Nations, gives him a kiss. I don't know if that's legal for them, but you know, she said, "Look, ambassador, if there's one thing you do, go transport yourself, go do this VR." So that's I think one of the positive sides of VR, but I want to start out with a negative. Okay. And I know you both have clips on this amazing world that you both deal with and help sculpt. But one of the things we're dealing with politically, I was sort of taken by what Derek Thompson just shared and was getting into in some of the sort of public policy questions that are raised. Don't you begin creating worlds if everyone's in VR of alternative worlds, alternative facts? Don't you change the very bearings that we deal with things? I mean, Samantha Power was trying to change the bearings of the Saudi ambassador to the UN and their sensitivity to certain issues. Are we going to end up with a world where facts are much more disputable than they even are now? And I'll start with you, Jonathan.
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of issues still to solve with virtual reality. Issues of privacy, identity, and I think the one you propose here is even more interesting. I think the value of VR might possibly outweigh, at least in the early phase, the current negatives. We'll find ways to work and design around some of those situations. But the ability to invoke that sort of empathy that Samantha Powers experienced is sort of the exact use case as why we see so much potential with virtual reality. The ability to transport, I'm so glad you said that, because that's really sort of the key of virtual reality, is transporting a user to a place that they couldn't typically experience in their current reality.
And Christine, as you answer this, I recognize you're an innovator and designer. You're doing great things. Hopefully, you're making a lot of money doing it. And probably the last thing in your mind is this worry of alternative. Do you get irritated by people like me asking these kind of wonky questions on what the impact of the stuff may be that you're doing?
No, not at all. And I think, Jonathan, you're exactly right. But I think, with any sort of technology, I think we all have a responsibility in how we use it. I think the technology itself is always neutral. It's just how we apply it. And there's always going to be people that apply technology in a positive way or a negative way. I mean, gunpowder is used for fireworks or, in guns. So I think there's always some level of responsibility that we need to have, and that comes with education and awareness on how to use it for positive and negative.
What are your fears of the negative? What could be used? If I were Dr. Evil, what could I use your technology for? What's in your up at night list?
You mean provided we're not all in the Matrix now, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to inspire anybody. And I mean, I think there's some of the initial...
This is DC, people can regulate against whatever you advise.
Right. I mean, I think, some of the initial concerns, are probably similar to some of the, same things that have been surrounding video games for a long time and sort of subjecting people, particularly younger people, to violence and desensitizing them in a way, especially if you're exposed to a much more potent reality, and you're presenting people with certain realities, it might risk desensitizing them in a way. But again, that stuff it's very gray. Those are very gray areas of what can happen.
Just before you go to videos, we have a great writer at The Atlantic, Hannah Rosen, who wrote a cover story for us a year ago called The Wired Child. And it really was a journey into how she was experiencing her child's new world of a child that was growing up on video games. It was growing up with a very different sense of digital facility and sensitivity than anyone of Hannah's generation. What do you think the VR child will look like or be like?
probably thinking about both of our own
Yeah,
kids
I know,
right now. my son is like better at using a touchpad than anything else.
Well, I think something that I hope happens is, video games, they're very one-dimensional, right? I see a thing on a screen and there's sort of this detachment between what I'm doing and what's happening on a screen. All of that breaks away when you're in virtual reality. When I see a person and that person is at scale to me, killing that person or hurting that person feels very, very, very different. And Assad talked a little bit about this as well with the power of AR and them being sibling technologies. I mean, I think it, rather than desensitizing kids, it might teach them more than we expect at this moment.
I also think, one of the things that, we don't always talk about as part of virtual reality, but, there's a reason why the world's biggest social network bought Oculus. It does have the power to connect us, to be a device that we can use to connect us with other people. It's not just, right now, you're looking at the technology and how it's being applied right now based on where it is right now in its sort of trajectory. But I mean, absolutely, you have the power to connect yourself with friends, with colleagues, with people in other countries and discuss without having to make the physical journey. And I think, to be honest, we've started to see a lot of our kids be more connected, to different countries, to the world around them. I think this only helps them take another step in that direction.
Jonathan, why don't we watch, when we go take a little trip, we're going to have 2 videos to show what you both do and sort of take this without our headgear, right? So this is, imagine we've got headgear on and we're seeing here. Is that a good entry into this?
I think that's
so. John, why don't we show Jonathan's clip here? Wow. I just would like to know if Atlantic Live had one of these a year from now and what one of our events would. We'd give you all headsets and we could all walk through and have this. Christine, why don't we watch yours as well, back to back? And I just sort of, because they're great comparisons. But as you guys are all watching this, I just want you to know that my dream, virtual reality thing would be sort of conversations interacting with Henry Kissinger, right? So he's still around and alive. Maybe we can kind of go out and do this, but it doesn't always have to be blowing things up, right? You can imagine other circumstances. So Christine, let's do Christine's video.
With a flick of the Daydream controller, charm, tame, and conjure your way through this captivating story that involves 20 spells and challenges across 3 distinct storylines narrated by Star Eddie Redmayne.
Would you mind, would you just open my case and step inside?
The VR experience combines live, real-time elements with pre-rendered video, designed to maximise the quality to a level previously unseen in mobile VR. We took LiDAR scans, assets and references directly from the original film set to inform placement, scale and geometry of the VR environments. For the first time on mobile, unprecedented interactivity, visually stunning photoreal assets, high-fidelity VFX and detailed character development have come together to create a seamless cinematic adventure.
Wow, pretty cool. So you were involved, I mean, one of the things I was reading about was Ascending the Wall.
Yep.
So did you do that? The Ascending the Wall is a segment of Game of Thrones. It's a Game of Thrones clipper, and so tell us about that.
Yeah, so that was actually the first VR project that we did at Framestore.
Anybody not watch Game of Thrones, by the way? Just maybe 1 or 2 hands? Okay. Maybe you just go watch this segment. I think it's season 7. Margaret Lowe said she hasn't watched either. We'll get her a special clip. So describe it in a little more detail for those not informed.
So in the world of Game of Thrones, this is always fun to describe, there is a 700-foot ice wall that keeps out, wildling raiders, and also what eventually becomes the main threat to their world, which is the zombie Ice Walker army. So there's this team of guys called the Night's Watch that defend the wall. Basically, we did an experience where you can ascend this 700-foot ice wall. You put yourself in an elevator in the real world, put on the headset. As you go up the elevator 700 feet, the floor rumbles. You're hit with cold air, and then as all things end in Game of Thrones, all men must die. So you get shot by a fiery arrow. So that was actually our first experience that we did. We've done quite a bit as a visual effects company at our core with tying into Hollywood films. The narratives that we have for a lot of these big IPs are so much richer. The worlds are so much richer that it really enables us to, build a depth of content that fans are always very, very eager to continue to explore.
How many years have you been doing this?
Good question. 4
years?
4.
How many?
4.
40?
No, I'm like 4 or 5, 4, yeah.
In VR
Yeah.
specifically? This wave of VR, 3. Previous wave,
So 3
2.
years. So remarkably, I mean, in a relatively short period of time, you've already begun to see what we've seen on screen here. As you project yourself 5 years ahead, what will the VR world and our interaction with it look like?
I think it's going to move way beyond entertainment.
Yep.
Internally, our studio views virtual reality as sort of this next step in computing. It's an evolution of human-computer interaction, right? If you look at the human-computer interaction timeline, you have punch cards all the way back in the 1700s. You have command line interfaces, the GUI, all these amazing things, touch interfaces, voice interfaces, and now we have this new one, spatial interfaces, right? So AR and VR fall into this evolution of human computing interaction. So the way we see it, entertainment is just the first step. It's maybe the hook, if you will. There's a lot of content readily available that we can easily throw into a headset and experience these games and movies and whatnot. But I think the more interesting thing is, how do people use this to improve their lives? Assad's artwork is a great example of how someone's using it outside of the realm of entertainment, right? And moving on beyond that, groups like Microsoft are pushing the HoloLens as a productivity tool eventually, right? And so I think in 5 years, we're going to have many more applications that have nothing to do with entertainment.
Yeah.
Almost all of the early pioneers of the internet and the web say that communicating with grandkids was not the big driver, but that sex was. Do you guys worry about the sex dimensions of what is possible in the technology, or is that just going to be part of the scene? Christina?
Christine.
Oh, Christine.
It is definitely just probably going to be part of the scene. I think, again, I try to look at it as a neutral technology, and we try to put our focus into using it for good. I think the applications for healthcare and for education are absolutely immense. And yes, sex will be a part of that. It's been part of every other media. So I don't see this as being any different. And I think we have the same responsibility in this technology as we have in other technologies before it to make sure that we're educating and regulating in a way that's responsible.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly like Christine said, it's how we use it, and I think sex is going to be a part of it. It's not something that you should try to stop, I don't think. What I do believe in is giving people the right tools to be able to control their circumstances and not be caught into something that they don't want to be caught into.
But not to go too far down this path, but it does remind me of when you had Senator Lieberman and others raising content questions or raising questions about the desensitization of kids to certain things or access. But I mean, Larry Pressler, who is a conservative United States senator, said without the applications on I mean, he's just very public about it. With the sex fund, the internet would have not become what it did. So it just raises that interesting question. But let me ask you a little bit about competition, because you are in Seattle, and so there's an ecosystem of dynamic innovation there. Absolutely. You're in New York. Which of you is a better place to do this work? Which place? Yeah. Yes. Or does it?
Do you want to compete?
I mean, I don't think, I think again, like, I think, there's a lot of particularly on the West Coast, there's a lot of virtual reality work happening, particularly in LA and in the Valley. And I think, yeah, you can't deny that. But I think, again, the applications are incredibly wide-reaching. And I think, you know, for me, I'm flying all over the world constantly. Right. So it doesn't really matter.
Let me put a fine way. We're going to, in a panel coming up next, is on sort of the DNA of innovation and people looking at how do you create these clusters of talented people, get them to stick, get them to be dynamic, to kind of create these. So if you were to make a bet beyond Seattle, let's just sort of take your own bias out of it for a minute, where would be a place that's getting it right in terms of incentivizing, you know, the next creative boom in VR or augmented reality?
That's interesting. I like what I'm seeing coming out of Austin. I think there's a nice sort of grassroots, sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps attempt to figure out how to make this technology work. I think at the end of the day, though, to answer one of your other questions, how do you incentivize people? You give them great problems to solve. I mean, designers, creatives, innovators, at the end of the day, money is a factor, but problem solving, that's why they got into this game. And they're interested in that.
Christine, what would your bet be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's as much about, I think, you know, I don't think it's as much about the actual geographical location as it is about the company ethos and the culture. I mean, you're looking at companies like Magic Leap that exist in Miami, you know what I mean, away from a lot of, away from the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world. So I think that it's about the ethos of the company, and I think it's, you know, giving them good problems to solve. I think it's good management, focus on creativity and giving people leeway to solve their own problems and explore their own curiosities, I think is much more important than just the geographical location.
And before I go to the audience for your questions and thoughts on this, where is our country, where's the United States in the kind of broader picture? Because I know China's a player in this, South Korea. President's in South Korea right now. I was watching him last night. He's talking about selling defense systems, and I was wondering about South Korea VR. Tokyo, Japan, and when you, India. And so when you look around the world at other superpowers in VR, they're not just here in the United States. So what does that competitive scene look? What are they doing that you worry about in terms of competing with your businesses?
I wouldn't say worry. I mean, our company actually has quite a large business in China. And matter of fact, we just launched a large district in China bought VR headsets for almost all of their schools. So these are thousands of headsets potentially inside of schools, teaching young children new concepts through virtual reality. I think oftentimes we can be a bit slow to adopt some of these things or adapt some of these things. So that maybe that's what I worry about, is how long before we begin.
So is it easier to do that in China than the United States?
I'm not sure. I'm really not. Yeah.
Christina or Christine?
Yeah, we also have business in China, and we've been doing quite a bit of work with Chinese clients as well. And there's an immense opportunity. I think there's, like, for lack of a better word, a little bit less maybe snobbery towards this type of technology and wanting to have, you know, a pristine tech or something that doesn't look dumb on your head, or even the most highest fidelity graphics possible in the experience. I think there's much more eagerness and willingness to approach that. I think one thing that I do see as well is that location-based experiences are huge, especially in China and Asia. They're starting to catch on and become much more popular here, but they've been something that's been, you know, a big focus of VR content development in China.
I've read that both of you have to worry a lot about motion sickness of people wearing these VR things, which I found bizarre, because you could be sitting here, but I could get sick, maybe ascending the wall or maybe falling down the wall in the Game of Thrones episode. Are there any other physical worries that you have, impacts that people might experience from wearing these headsets?
Interesting. Yes. One of the first things we teach our designers that come on is do no harm, right? Motion sickness is one of them, but you can imagine you're in a virtual environment. You can't see the walls around you. We do have systems in place to help you see the wall when you come close to it. But if you're really engaged in a moment, you smack right into the wall. You could, right? And so when's the right time to, you know, do a jump scare? Or when's the right time to sort of pull back on an experience? I think there's other things, physical things to worry about that will be discovered as time goes on, because this is really a new experience for consumers. And so there's things we learn.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of speculation, and not a lot has been studied in terms of long-term physical effects on your brain or your eyes. I know there's a particular worry about children under a certain age whose, certain aspects of their eyes and their brain are still developing, and having too much exposure to VR because of basically you're forced to kind of focus on something right here constantly. So I think there's a lot of areas that haven't been studied and should be studied, but I think you also start to look at, a way where this progresses beyond just the screen in front of you. You start to look at the technology where it's like beaming stuff in your eye, which sounds crazy, but theoretically is a safer way to actually experience some of this stuff. So I think there's a lot of things that are going to go hand in hand with using this type of technology and study on physiological effects.
Interesting. Let me open the floor. Questions, comments? Yes, right here in the front. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
Hello, Camera. Nice to be here. Based upon the last question and the last answers, how does VR impact our real life and our social skills?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think some of the positive ways in which it impacts real life, there are lots of folks in the medical community exploring how VR can be used to help treat things like PTSD, or overcome certain sort of medical procedures.
Diagnose dementia. Empathy training for young kids who maybe have bullying experiences at schools. So there's lots of positive impacts. I think socially, we're only beginning to experience what that looks like and what that feels like now. I've seen many of the positive sides where people are connecting from all over the world. You hop into a social experience and, oh, hey, where are you from? Belgium? Awesome. I'm from Seattle. And so having these sort of new social experiences is pretty dynamic.
Terrific. Yes, right here. Hi. Good morning.
Hi, how are you? So,
who are you? Tell us who you are.
My name's Nathaniel. So with a world that's becoming more quickly connected, and Amazon will be able to deliver anything to your door, it almost seems like you'll never leave your house. So what does it mean to be a citizen of a country? And how would it kind of like infringe on what the power that the government will have over its people?
Interesting.
Well, Christine.
That was a loaded question. A lot of different things to disseminate. And I just sort of have that vision in WALL-E, where everyone's like in their chairs plugged in. But yeah, I mean, I think, there is a possibility that, people could not leave their houses, but I think I also kind of see, like, with all these, I've also seen, like, with all these sort of advancements in technology, I've also seen people, there's like a whole culture of people that return to some of the more simple things in life. Absolutely. And some of the more, organic things, whether it's, on one side of the spectrum, like the reaction to mass-produced food is like people going more farm to table, like that whole thing. And I think there's always, my point is I think there's always a counter to every sort of, extreme. So I think, we'll all kind of return to find some sort of homeostasis, but right now we're in this crazy kind of burgeoning and ballooning point of just keeping to build this tech and advance it.
And I would just follow up with that. As innovators, I think it's our job to ask those questions and to go through those mental exercises. But I think also it's our job to paint a better picture for the world. What world do we want to make? And explore the dystopia, but use that as a method for seeing where we don't want to go.
One of the, just in response to both of these questions, they're very interesting, is as I've dug into what this may mean myself, I can imagine having on the other side of me an evil version of Christine and Jonathan who wanted to do very different things, who might want to not solve PTSD, but rather use this for a certain kind of soldiery or special op. You can imagine lots of things coming about. You could imagine a way to generate extreme turbocharged mutual empathy, incredible patriotism, a return to all sorts of kinds of nationalism and mutual concern, where you could imagine the opposite. And so I do think it's interesting, and one of the things I often wonder in these Atlantic Live events is whether or not our notion of wanting to be progressive and do good in the world is actually a kind of invented thing here, that we do need to worry, in fact, about the other side of it, that someone out there is looking at how to make a buck by doing something different.
I think it's an important question to ask ourselves, but I think the answer is not in doing nothing, because whether we do it or not, someone else is going to. Yeah. And so I think I would much rather have my team working on defining the future of this than leaving it up to somebody else. So for me, it's an imperative. We have to keep exploring these technologies.
Just finally, I'm going to leave the last word for Christine, and thank you both. This has been a wonderful conversation. What is the next really super cool thing that you have done that we haven't seen?
Oh. Can you talk about it?
That's the problem. I'm like trying to find some way of like making it in metaphors. No, I mean we've had the pleasure of working on a lot of really cool AR stuff that's coming out. We've been working with certain AR companies. I won't name them, but we've been working on a lot of really interesting applications for augmented reality. And we're also, my team is working on a particular like educational piece right now that I'm really excited about getting out there next year.
Vague, vague, vague. So I
Yeah,
hope you will come
guys.
back
Yeah.
right on the verge of when you're like launching one of these things and think of us and come back. Ladies and gentlemen, Christine Cattano with Framestore VR Studio, Jonathan Faunce with HEC Vive. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.